Did that stop the recording? There we go. Okay. Um, I hope you guys don't see a second recording of this. I thought it was recording, but I think that I laid some papers down on top of my laptop keyboard and I stopped it. So I'm going to try this again. So hopefully it works this time. Okay, we finished up the last time and we were talking about literacy and children reading and encouraging children to sit longer and to look at pictures and turn pages and things of that sort. And so now we're going to move on to excuse me, phonological awareness. Sorry about that. And phonological awareness is the child's ability to focus on the sound structure of language, to focus on the sound structure of language. And it also helps children become aware of uh, syllables, sounds, syllables, words, sentences, and it's how we're putting all of those syllables together to make words. For example, a kindergartner, a preschooler, will be learning the ABCs, and they will be learning that B says B, D says D, T says T. They'll also be learning vowels and how to put these letters together to form words. They certainly will be learning their name and how to write their name and hopefully associating that letter with the sound in their name. They're learning that when you put these sounds together, you get words such as k, at, hat, rat, and we're into rhyming words to help them see how changing an initial consonant changes the word. Um, we know that our kiddos who many years ago were, well, not so many years ago, were either seen by the resource teacher or seen by the speech pathologist because they couldn't read. And we know that we have to provide the foundational services. Children have to have the foundation for reading in order to learn to read. So in preschool, kindergarten, first grade, second grade, they're learning to read. They're getting the foundation. They're spelling, they're reading, they're learning some of the rules of syntax and grammar. And then by the time they get to third and fourth grade, they are now reading to learn. We've switched the roles, learning to read, moving into reading to learn. So dyslexia was a word that we talked about a little bit a few years ago, but really you didn't see many kids coming through that had that diagnosis. And it's because the schools didn't really address dyslexia. But we now know that that isn't the case. They do have to diagnose and provide treatment for dyslexia. And Orton Gillingham is the treatment that is the most popular now. I think that it's hard to find someone who does this particular treatment. Um, the um, there's a couple, I can't think of their name. There's a couple that lives just outside of Muncie, in between Muncie and Yorktown, and they are tutors. They have had the training, and they do have clientele, and they are teaching Orton Gillingham. I know a lady whose son goes there. It's been an effective treatment for him. He still struggles. It's a neurological condition. You never get over it, but that doesn't mean that you're not intelligent, that you don't have normal intelligence. There are lots of people who have dyslexia who are successful. But that has been the treatment here recently of choice. So now we're providing services for these kids, and not ignoring the need for diagnosing appropriately. Maybe this particular disorder has been called a language processing disorder. Um, it may be that a learning disability. The kids were getting some services and some help, but maybe it wasn't the right kind. So we know that phonological awareness and getting these concepts and these skills early on really are very important in terms of being able to learn to read and read to learn. Early reading success shows that print concept knowledge and phonological awareness are the best predictors for that success. We're building on skills. We're building on skills. We also know in terms of comprehension that we cannot separate language development and intellectual growth, and think of intellectual growth as cognition. And remember, I've talked about language and cognition and how they run parallel. I've also talked about how perception and cognition and language are all intermingled and work together. And so that's part of that role with comprehension. And I'll tell you, if you have a child who struggles so hard to decode words in a sentence, let's say the sentence is 8 to 10 words long, and this child is reading and they're decoding and they're trying to sound out these words, and maybe it takes 10 minutes. It takes 10 minutes to get through this sentence, and by the time they get to the end, they have no idea what they read. So there is the role of comprehension. If we want to understand what we read and to learn, we've got to be able to read it fluently. I'm not talking about somebody who stutters. I'm talking about that smooth, even flow of reading. Um, I want to read a sentence. Okay. Children must gain understanding of concepts in order to learn to use some forms of grammar and meaning effectively. That's fluent reading. But if I had to go, oh my gosh, children must gain under. If I had to do that for that entire sentence, by the time I got to the end, I would have no idea what I was talking about. So that comprehension and as a result of reading fluently is very important. Another issue for comprehension is WH words. Who, what, where, when, and why, and how. One of the first WH words that a child understands is what. What is your name? What did you do at school today? What would you like for lunch? What. Then we have where and who. Then comes when, how, and why. Now, when, how, and why develop later because they deal with time. They're dealing with time. The child, or the concepts of causality too. The child must understand the concept of time before he can produce the words or ask the words. When are we going to the store? When are we going to get ice cream? When will we be home? So learning time and causality is important, and some of the WH concepts will come at that time. Another sort of interesting concept about language is figurative language. And we know that many times the acquisition of language and what we understand precedes what we're able to produce or express. And so a good example of that is figurative language. And we know that we have words such as idioms, similes, metaphors, irony. And I will tell you that idioms are the most commonly used figurative language. Now, when we don't understand something and we're watching a person and we're talking to them, we're going to watch their faces, we're going to watch their body language to help us to understand something that they said that maybe we really don't understand. And certainly an example of that might be if I said to you, "Oh, I really like the way you have your hair cut today. You must have just done that. It looks really sharp. I like that. Keep doing it that way." Or, "Hey, I really like that haircut. Ooh, when did you decide to do that?" You can tell by my tone, my inflection, the rhythm in my speech, my face, that I really didn't mean that. And so that's just one of those things where if we don't understand, we have to look for those cues along the way. Um, as we talk about idioms, idioms have been around for a long, long, long time. And this is what I've been using. I like the play on words. I really do. I like the play on words. Some idioms have come from Native American customs. Well, this one, bury the hatchet, you can see why. Native Americans. Okay, we're going to put our hatchets down. We're not going to fight. We're going to have friends. We're going to smoke the peace pipe. Some idioms originated as a colloquialism or from slang, lots of slang. Proverbs are short sayings that sort of teach us something, or there's some truth, some words of wisdom, so to speak. Sometimes idioms go back to the ancient Greeks and Romans. They used them as well, but it had some reflection on the time. It was meaning for them, meaning for in terms of how they live their lives or their daily activities. And a cliche is an expression that we use over and over again, and it becomes old and sort of like a fad. It's a fad. When we talk about metaphors, refers to one thing by mentioning another, and it is sort of contradictory. This one, the snow is a white blanket. Well, yeah, the snow is cold, but it's not a blanket. Snow is not a blanket. The hospital was a refrigerator. Well, the hospital is not the same thing as a refrigerator, but what it's implying is the hospital felt very cold. My teacher is a dragon. Well, no, the teacher isn't a dragon, but she may be in a bad mood or crabby like a dragon. So we have some contradictory thoughts going on there. Now let's see if we can find some idioms that are not as well known. And if you're going to teach idioms, what you need to do is you need to make sure that you are able to explain it to whomever you're teaching, and you need to be able to make sure that you can put it in a sentence, which also helps with the explanation. Let's see. Let me see if I can find one that, okay. Oh, here's one. I like this one. This was a new one for me, actually. Little pitchers have big ears. Okay, who can explain that? Any of you out there in my virtual world, can any of you explain that? I'm also having my face-to-face students do idioms, and they have to draw from their handy dandy little jar here, and I've got them written down, and we're doing the same thing. Little pitchers have big ears. Wonder if any of you know what that means. Well, I'm going to read it in a sentence, and remember, putting it in a sentence helps us understand. My big sister and her friends never tell secrets around me. They say that little pitchers have big ears. Well, I could explain what I think that means, that little sisters are nosy and they're always snooping around and they want to know what the bigger girls are doing. So let's see what the book says about the meaning. Little children listening to the conversations of older people often hear and understand a lot more than people give them credit for. Okay, well, I sort of got it. But here is the origin. This is what I think is kind of funny. The creator of this ancient saying imagined that the handles on the sides of a two-handled pitcher look like human ears. The little pitchers in this idiom, and it's Pitchers, the little pitchers in this idiom stand for small children. And having big ears means they are able to hear and understand things adults think they're too young to know. So the handles on the pitcher reminded them of ears. That's a cute one. Okay, let me find another one. Ignorance is bliss. I use this one. If you just had the idiom, would you be able to explain it? Ignorance is bliss. Well, let's see if you can after I read the sentence. The bad news can wait until tomorrow. Sometimes ignorance is bliss. Not knowing makes me feel better. Okay? The meaning is, it is better not to know bad news sometimes, especially if you're happy. It's going to mess things up. The origin, many writers over the centuries have expressed this idea. The Greek playwright Sophocles wrote it around 400 BC. 1900 years later, a Dutch scholar quoted it. Then Thomas Gray, the British poet of the 1700s, used it in one of his poems. He wrote, "Where ignorance is bliss, 'tis folly to be wise." It has been a popular saying ever since. Somebody in the clinic will ask me how to do something, and I'll say, I don't know. I don't want to know. Ignorance is bliss. That means I don't have one more thing I have to do. All right, let's try this one. This is the last one. Fly in the ointment. That's an idiom. What does fly in the ointment mean? Can you figure that one out? Does anybody know? The food, the music, and the decorations were perfect, but her camera broke. That was the fly in the ointment. It means a small annoyance that spills an otherwise pleasant situation. The origin, this saying comes from the Bible, Ecclesiastes. Thousands of years ago, people realized that a tiny nuisance can sometimes ruin something pleasant. Ointment is a creamy substance that soothes, softens, or heals the skin. Finding a fly in the ointment would certainly ruin it. That's interesting. I think it's interesting. Well, try teaching idioms to someone from another country. It's raining cats and dogs, and they look out the window expecting to see cats and dogs falling from the sky when they know they don't. But if you're looking at it literally, then there's going to be a problem. Okay, and I think I'm where I need to be once again after the recording stopped. We can also talk um, about the language skills of someone who is bilingual. And on the surface, that word seems to mean two languages. They're caught within um, learning both, and we assume that they're proficient in both of those, but that may not be the case. Um, the ideal modern or model of a bilingual speaker would be that they can read, if they're proficient, they can read it, write it, spell it, and speak it. That would be a proficient bilingual individual. And we distinguish between somebody who understands it, or the receptive bilingual, who is different from the productive bilingual. The productive bilingual is competent in both languages, just as I mentioned, but they may even be more dominant in one. And probably at that moment when they're learning, they may be more dominant in the language that's spoken in the home. But then as they get a little bit older, they're in school, it's maybe primary language is English, their friends are speaking English, then the first language that they learned begins to take the back burner, and the language that they're more exposed to at the time will take over. The, the uh, the receptive bilingual, that's what I was looking for, has the dominant language and understands a second language, but perhaps can't read the second language. They're just not as proficient. So we have two types. And I don't think that's uncommon for individuals to be able to say, I know a little bit of Spanish, I know a little bit of German. But remember, the plasticity, the brain plasticity of that individual who is learning both of those languages is a little bit, I don't want to say superior, but that brain plasticity is more flexible because they have to hold on to one language. They've got one language sitting out here while they're using another language, and they're holding it. They know what's going on. And even in their mind, some of that language may be there, getting ready to be used, and they can switch. Um, Experts differ on when they feel that the best time to learn a second language is. Now, some of us might think that it is better for a young child to learn the second language as opposed to an adult, that the younger brain is more receptive to learning the language. We say that about learning to water ski, snow ski, anything. The children aren't afraid, let them do it. But there really is no better time to learn a language. Sometimes adults, we're more mature, we're more receptive, we'll study a little bit harder as opposed to the child being exposed to a younger learning it in context. So there really is no agreement on the best time to acquire a second language. With learning two languages, um, and it may not be so much for the child as it would be for adults learning the second language, that they're going to be mixing some vocabulary words, or some of the expressions may be off just a little bit. And it depends on how immersed they are into that community. Um, we are also seeing that in bilingualism, there's code mixing. You're using some words that you may be speaking Spanish and English at the same time. If you don't know a Spanish word or you don't know the English word, you may have to switch codes and use both languages. Um, and I think that's going to be close to the end. Didn't take as much time as I thought. Hopefully I didn't forget anything. So that will finish up chapter 6. And I'll probably finish up chapter 6 tomorrow for my face-to-face students. Then we will begin chapter 7, and then we will be ready for the next exam before we leave for Thanksgiving. I do want to encourage you, follow along each week with the recordings. If possible, don't wait until you're right before the exam and then expect to be able to pull all of this information together and do well on the exam. And I think that you've learned by now that I teach 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and I'm trying to put up 3 uh, recorded lectures in the same week so that you are staying up, I'm staying up, and my face-to-face students are staying up with the material. Um, Check Canvas frequently. Don't wait and ask me about something that I mentioned at the beginning of this semester, or we had some extra credit, but you've got to stay up with what is happening. And you've got the PowerPoint, you've got the syllabus, you know what's going on, hopefully. But if you don't know, just come and see me or send me an invitation for a Zoom meeting or call me or something, so that you can stay current. So, but you've got to stay up with the lectures. So I'm going to sign off now. Hopefully this one goes through. It, I think, is still recording, so maybe I made it. Today is Thursday. It is the 5th of November, and it's supposed to be a beautiful weekend, so I hope you can get out and enjoy that, and I will talk to you later. Bye.